It all began with a package. A plain, white envelope slipped under the door one rainy Wednesday evening. I wouldn't have thought much of it. Our mailbox gets jammed all the time. But something about it felt off. There was no return address, no stamps. Just my name scrawled across the front in hurried, jagged handwriting. Jenna was in the kitchen, humming something off-key while chopping vegetables. She didn't seem to notice when I picked it up. I debated calling her over, asking if she knew what it was. But something in the back of my mind told me to open it alone. Inside was a single sheet of paper folded into thirds, the edges slightly crinkled. The words were typed, which immediately made my stomach knot. Your wife has secrets she doesn't want you to know. Be at the Faint Bar on 5th Street tonight. 10 p.m. Watch carefully. The blood drained from my face as I read it over and over, trying to find some logical explanation. Was it a prank? A scam? But who would go to such lengths? And why? Jake, can you grab me the garlic from the pantry? Jenna called out, her voice casual, her laugh slipping easily into the air like she hadn't just been accused of something dark and sordid. My hands trembled as I folded the letter and shoved it into my back pocket. I brought her the garlic and kissed her on the temple, all while my thoughts raced at 100 miles per hour. The truth was I couldn't let it go. I couldn't just sit in the house and stew over whether this note meant something or nothing. By the time she kissed me goodnight, I had already decided. At 9:45 p.m., I parked 2 blocks away from the bar and stepped out into the night air. The faint glow of the streetlights painted the sidewalk in streaks of gold and shadow. 5th Street wasn't a place I frequented. It was on the grittier side of town, where the laughter spilling out of the doors always seemed edged with something sharper, something dangerous. I slipped into the bar quietly, keeping my head low. The place was dimly lit, all smoky corners and faded posters for bands that probably broke up a decade ago. And then I saw her. Under the faint bar light, Jenna's lips brushed another's neck. I don't remember breathing. I don't remember blinking. My hands were ice as I stood there, frozen in the doorway, watching my wife, lean into a man I didn't recognize. She smiled at him in a way I hadn't seen in years. I turned and walked out, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might crack my ribs. Once outside, I leaned against a lamppost and forced myself to take deep, steady breaths. There were 2 voices screaming in my head. One demanded I storm back in and drag her out by her wrist. The other told me to stay calm, to think, to plot my next move carefully. In my pocket, the letter crinkled as I pulled it out again. There were no instructions for what came next, no neatly tied-up answers. Only questions. And rage. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it again. Jenna's lips grazing the stranger's neck, her hands resting on his shoulders, her smile. It wasn't the polite smile she gave neighbors or the forced one she wore during work events. It was soft, warm, almost giddy. When she came home later that night, I was already in bed, pretending to be asleep. The door creaked open, and I heard her careful footsteps. My breathing stayed slow, steady, even as her shadow passed through the room and she slipped into bed beside me. Her scent hit me first. Not her usual vanilla perfume, but something sharper, muskier. I fought the urge to recoil. Instead, I lay there, still as a corpse, while my mind spun out of control. The next morning, I decided to test the waters. I didn't want to accuse her outright. She'd deny it, twist it, make me feel like I was insane. So I waited until she was sipping her coffee, scrolling through her phone at the kitchen counter. "Hey, Jen," I said casually, keeping my voice light. "What did you get up to last night? You got in pretty late." Her eyes flicked up, just for a second, before returning to her phone. "Work stuff," she said, not missing a beat. "Karen had me stay late for some last-minute brainstorming." Karen again, her human shield. "Oh yeah," I pressed, leaning against the counter. "I thought Karen left for Boston last week. Didn't you say she was visiting her parents?" Her hand froze mid-sip. For a fraction of a second, she stared at the coffee like it might offer her an answer. Then, she looked up at me, her eyes narrowing just slightly. "Did I?" she said, her voice lilting, like she was genuinely unsure. I must have mixed up the dates. It was definitely Karen, though. It was a bold-faced lie, but she sold it with ease. I wanted to throw the coffee mug across the room, to shatter her facade with it, but I forced myself to smile instead. "Ah, gotcha. My mistake," I said, playing dumb. I left the kitchen before my emotions betrayed me. That day, I decided to dig deeper. I couldn't just confront her without proof. She'd gaslight me into oblivion. So, during lunch, I called Karen. "Hey, Karen, it's Jake," I started, keeping my tone casual. "Jenna mentioned you guys were working late last night. I just wanted to thank you for keeping her busy. She's been stressed lately, and it's good she has someone like you." Karen sounded confused at first, then laughed nervously. Jake, I wasn't working late with Jenna. I haven't seen her in weeks. We've just been texting." The confirmation hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt the phone slipping in my grip, but I managed to keep my voice steady. Must have been a misunderstanding," I said, quickly wrapping up the call. "Thanks, Karen. Sorry to bother you." By the time I hung up, my pulse was roaring in my ears. Jenna had lied to me, boldly, effortlessly. That evening, I found her phone on the kitchen counter, left unlocked for the first time in months. The temptation was too much. I knew it was wrong, invasive, but I couldn't stop myself. I scrolled through her texts, scanning for anything that might confirm what I already knew. And there it was, a thread with someone named Mark, full of flirty emojis, inside jokes I didn't recognize, and plans for next time. The latest message made my blood boil. "Last night was perfect. Can't stop thinking about you. Same time next week." I dropped the phone back onto the counter as if it burned me. My hands clenched into fists, my chest heaving. She didn't just betray me. She flaunted it, made a routine out of it. That night, I didn't pretend to sleep. I stayed up, my mind working through every possible scenario, every plan. This wasn't going to end quietly. The following day, I woke up with a purpose. The anger simmering inside me had settled into something colder, sharper. A need for answers, for control. If Jenna wanted to play games, I'd show her she wasn't the only one capable of moving pieces on the board. When she left for work, I went straight for her phone. She had started setting a passcode again, but I wasn't surprised. Last night had taught me enough. What I needed wasn't on her phone anymore. It was out there in her world. I just had to follow the breadcrumbs. My first move was Mark. He was my only lead, the name in her texts that made my skin crawl. I searched social media, combing through every Mark in our city until I found him. Mark D., a fitness trainer with an obnoxiously polished profile. His page was littered with shirtless photos, motivational quotes, and comments from women who used far too many heart emojis. And Jenna had liked more of his posts than I cared to count. I studied him like I was prepping for an exam, learning his routines, his clients, his hangouts. It didn't take long to figure out that Mark worked at a boutique gym downtown. On a hunch, I checked Jenna's credit card statements online. Sure enough, there it was, weekly charges to that same gym. So that's where she'd been spending her time. It made me sick. I decided to see it for myself. That afternoon, I drove to the gym and parked across the street, careful to keep out of sight. I waited, my fingers drumming on the steering wheel, until Jenna's car pulled into the lot. She stepped out, her hair tied back, wearing leggings and a fitted tank top I hadn't seen before. She was smiling. It wasn't a casual smile, the kind she used to give me when she thought I wasn't looking. This was something else. Bright, excited. The kind of smile that makes a man's stomach twist because he knows it isn't meant for him. She walked inside, her phone in hand, and moments later, Mark appeared. He greeted her at the entrance with a hand on her back, guiding her in like they were the only two people in the world. I sat there, watching, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. It wasn't enough to see it. I needed to hear it. The next step required finesse. I waited until late that night, after Jenna was asleep, to order a small recording device online. 2 days later, it arrived, small enough to fit in the palm of my hand. The following morning, I acted as if everything was normal. I kissed Jenna goodbye, complimented her on her outfit, and even joked about ordering takeout for dinner. As soon as she left for work, I slipped the device into the front pocket of her gym bag. Now all I had to do was wait. When Jenna returned home that evening, she was in good spirits, chatting about some new workout plan and how exhausted she felt. I played along, nodding at the right moments, even as my heart pounded against my ribs. Later, when she was in the shower, I retrieved the device from her bag and locked myself in the garage. My hands trembled as I pressed play. The voices were faint at first, background chatter, the clinking of weights. Then her voice came through, clear and unmistakable. "So, when's the next session?" Jenna asked, her tone light, playful. "Whenever you want, babe," Mark's voice responded, dripping with smug confidence. "You know I always make time for you." There was a pause, followed by Jenna's soft laugh. "You better. I didn't sign up for this just to get ignored." The recording continued, snippets of flirtation woven into what was supposed to be a professional setting. And then came the part that made my blood run cold. "I can't tonight," Jenna said, her voice dropping into a near whisper. "Jake's been weird lately. I think he's starting to suspect something." Mark chuckled. "Let him. He doesn't have the guts to do anything about it." I stopped the recording, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped the device. It wasn't just betrayal, it was mockery, disrespect. The woman I had shared a life with was treating me like a joke. But she'd underestimated me. They both had. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The morning after hearing that recording, something shifted inside me. The hurt, the anger, it all melted into a singular, razor-sharp focus. I wasn't going to let Jenna see me unravel. No, I'd give her the performance of a lifetime. I woke up early, made her favorite breakfast, pancakes with fresh berries, and greeted her with a warm smile when she walked into the kitchen. "Wow, Jake," she said, surprised. "What's the occasion?" "Just wanted to do something nice for my beautiful wife," I replied, flipping another pancake. "Figured you deserved it after all those tough gym sessions you've been doing lately." The mention of the gym made her pause, her fork hovering midair. But then she recovered, flashing me a bright, practiced smile. "Ah, thanks, babe. That's really sweet." I watched her eat, every movement of hers feeling like part of a play. She had no idea that I already knew the lines of her script. When she left for work, I grabbed my laptop and got to work. It was time to set the trap. First, I reached out to Mark. I created a fake Instagram account, complete with a believable profile picture and a bio that sounded like it belonged to a fitness enthusiast. Then I slid into his DMs with a simple opener. "Hey Mark, I heard about your gym from a friend. Thinking about joining, but wanted to know if you do private sessions." He responded within minutes. Of course he did. Men like Mark thrive on attention. "Absolutely. I'd be happy to work with you. DM me your number, and we can set something up." I sent him a fake number and strung him along with vague questions about schedules and pricing, all while saving every message for later. Next, I made an appointment with a private investigator. The screenshots and recordings were solid, but I wanted more. Something irrefutable. Something that would leave no room for Jenna to weasel out with excuses or fake tears. I explained the situation to the PI, who nodded sympathetically and assured me he'd get the evidence I needed. By the time Jenna came home that evening, I was sitting on the couch with a beer, watching a mindless game show. "How was your day?" she asked, tossing her gym bag onto the floor. "Good," I said, smiling up at her. "How about you? Big session with Mark today." Her head snapped toward me so fast I thought she might get whiplash. "What?" I kept my face neutral, feigning casual interest. "Your trainer, Mark, right? You've mentioned him before." She hesitated, her expression carefully blank. "Oh, yeah, he's fine. Nothing special." "Cool," I said, taking a sip of my beer. "I might swing by the gym sometime, see what all the hype's about." Her laugh was too quick, too loud. "You? At the gym? Come on, Jake. You've always hated that stuff." "People change," I said with a shrug, locking eyes with her. "Don't they?" For the first time, I saw her mask crack. A flicker of unease crossed her face before she smoothed it over with a dismissive wave. "Sure," she said, forcing a smile. "People change." She disappeared into the bedroom, and I sat there, feeling the smallest surge of victory. The doubt had been planted. She was beginning to squirm. The next few days passed in a careful dance. I played the part of the doting husband, even surprising her with a date night to her favorite Italian restaurant. Meanwhile, the PI sent me updates. Photos of Jenna and Mark meeting in secluded spots, timestamps that lined up with the gym charges on her credit card. The final piece came when Mark, ever the oblivious idiot, posted a photo on Instagram. It was a group shot from the gym, and there, off to the side, was Jenna. She wasn't doing anything particularly incriminating, but the caption made my blood boil. Another amazing session with my favorite client. Can't wait for the next one. #fitnessgoals. I saved the post, knowing exactly how I'd use it later. The trap was set. All I needed now was the perfect moment to spring it. The perfect moment arrived faster than I anticipated. Jenna had been planning a dinner party for weeks, something she described as a networking night with friends and coworkers. She had been fluttering around the house, arranging flowers and obsessing over the menu. "Mark's coming," she mentioned casually while chopping vegetables. I froze for a split second before recovering. "Mark from the gym?" "Yeah," she said, not looking at me. "He's a great conversationalist. Thought he'd bring some energy to the group." "Good idea," I said smoothly. Inside, my mind was racing. This wasn't just an opportunity, it was a golden one. The evening came, and the house filled with laughter and the clinking of glasses. Jenna was the perfect host, gliding between guests with her practiced charm. I played the attentive husband, topping off wine glasses and laughing at jokes that didn't land. Then Mark arrived. He walked in like he owned the place, his grin wide and confident. Jenna greeted him with a little too much enthusiasm, her hand lingering on his arm as she led him to the group. I stayed in the background, observing, watching how her gaze lingered on him, how his hand brushed her back more than once. It was subtle, but it was there, and I knew everyone else could see it, too. Midway through the evening, I made my move. "Hey, Mark," I said, catching him near the drinks table. "Jenna talks about you all the time. Says you're an amazing trainer." He laughed, puffing out his chest. "She's a great client. Dedicated. Focused." "I bet," I said, my tone light. "Must be nice, getting to spend so much time with her." His grin faltered for a split second before he recovered. "Yeah, she's great to work with." I didn't press further. Not yet. Instead, I waited until dinner was served, until the room was buzzing with wine-fueled chatter. As the plates were cleared and dessert was served, I stood, raising my glass. "A toast," I said, smiling warmly. Everyone quieted, their attention turning to me. Jenna looked up, surprised but pleased. "I just want to thank everyone for being here tonight," I began. Jenna's been so excited about this evening. She's put so much effort into making everything perfect, and I think we can all agree she's done an amazing job. The table erupted in polite applause, and Jenna's cheeks flushed as she beamed at me. "But," I continued, my tone shifting slightly, "I'd be lying if I said tonight was only about dinner and good company." A few people exchanged curious glances. Jenna's smile wavered. "There's something I've been meaning to address," I said, locking eyes with her. "Something I think it's time we talked about openly." The room fell silent, the weight of my words settling over the table like a storm cloud. "Jenna," I said, my voice steady, "why don't you tell everyone about Mark?" Her eyes widened, her fork clattering against her plate. What are you talking about?" she stammered. I turned to Mark, whose confident grin had disappeared. "Or maybe Mark would like to explain?" I don't know what you mean," Mark said, his voice shaky. "Oh, come on," I said, my voice dripping with mock encouragement. "Don't be shy. You've been so dedicated to Jenna's fitness goals. Why not share the details?" The guests exchanged awkward, bewildered looks. Jenna's face turned a deep shade of red as she shot me a glare that could have melted steel. "Jake, stop," she hissed. "Why?" I said, my voice rising. "Why stop now, Jenna? Why stop when we're finally getting to the truth? Should I share the texts, the recordings, or maybe Mark's little Instagram post about his favorite client?" Mark pushed back his chair, his face pale. "I should probably sit down," I snapped, my anger finally breaking through. "You wanted to be part of this, Mark. So stay. Own it." The room was silent except for the sound of Jenna's breathing, fast and shallow. She looked at me, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. Fear, maybe, or fury. "This is insane," she said, her voice trembling. "You're blowing things out of proportion. Mark is just my trainer." "Spare me," I said, tossing my napkin onto the table. I've seen the messages. Heard the recordings. You've been lying to me for months, Jenna. Months. The silence was deafening. Every guest was staring at her, their expressions a mix of shock and discomfort. Jenna opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Mark stood abruptly, mumbling something about needing to leave, and practically bolted for the door. Coward, I muttered under my breath. Jenna stayed frozen in her chair, her hands trembling. Congratulations, I said coldly, standing. You wanted to network tonight? Well, now everyone here knows exactly who you are. With that, I turned and walked out of the dining room, leaving her to face the wreckage alone. The house was eerily quiet the next morning. I'd spent the night on the couch, staring at the ceiling as the events of the dinner replayed in my mind. Jenna hadn't come to apologize, hadn't tried to explain. She'd stayed in the bedroom, the door shut tight like she could keep reality out. When I finally got up, she was already in the kitchen, nursing a cup of coffee. Her eyes were puffy, her hair disheveled. She didn't look like the composed, radiant woman she always tried to be. Good morning, I said, my voice devoid of warmth. She flinched, gripping her mug tighter. We need to talk, she said softly. Do we? I shot back, pulling a chair away from the table and sitting across from her. Or do you just want to spin this into something that doesn't make you look like the villain? Her face crumpled, but I felt no sympathy. Jake, I messed up, but it wasn't what you think. Mark and I... Don't... I interrupted, raising a hand. Don't insult me by lying again. I heard you. I saw the texts. This wasn't some one-time mistake, Jenna. You built this. Tears welled in her eyes, and for a moment, I thought she might actually own up to it. But then her expression hardened. You're not perfect either, Jake, she snapped. You've been distant for months. You barely touch me. You're always distracted. What was I supposed to do? I blinked, stunned at her audacity. Are you seriously trying to blame me for this? I'm not blaming you, she said, her tone defensive. But relationships are a two-way street. You checked out a long time ago. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. Right? So instead of talking to me, instead of trying to fix things, you decided to shack up with Mark. Solid logic, Jenna. Truly. Her face twisted with anger. Don't act like you're some saint, Jake. You've been distant, cold, like you don't even care anymore. Maybe if you'd paid attention... Stop, I said, slamming my hand on the table. The sound echoed in the kitchen, silencing her. Just stop. I'm done listening to you twist this into something it's not. You cheated, Jenna. You lied. Over and over. And now you're trying to make me feel like it's my fault? No, not this time. Her mouth opened, then closed, as if she couldn't find the words. For a moment, the silence between us felt like a canyon. What happens now? She finally whispered. I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms. That's the real question, isn't it? I still love you, she said, her voice cracking. I made a mistake, but I want to fix this. Please, Jake, we can get through this. I stared at her, searching her face for any sign of the woman I'd fallen in love with. But all I saw was someone I didn't recognize. Someone who'd betrayed me and tried to shift the blame when caught. I don't think we can, I said, my voice flat. Not anymore. Her breath hitched, and for a moment, I thought she might throw something. Instead, she got up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. If you want to throw everything away, fine. But don't act like you're innocent here. I watched her storm out of the room, the sound of her footsteps fading as she retreated to the bedroom. For the first time in our marriage, I felt absolutely nothing for her. Not anger, not sadness, not regret. Just nothing. And that terrified me more than anything else. The rest of the day dragged on like a nightmare stuck on loop. Jenna stayed locked in the bedroom, the faint sound of her pacing occasionally breaking the silence. I busied myself with meaningless tasks, cleaning the already spotless kitchen, reorganizing a bookshelf, anything to avoid thinking about what came next. By evening, the air in the house was suffocating. I knew I couldn't stay in that silence any longer. Grabbing my keys, I headed for the door without a word. Where are you going? Jenna's voice called from the hallway. I turned, seeing her standing there in sweats and a faded hoodie. She looked smaller somehow, deflated, The sharp edges of her defiance from the morning had dulled. Out, I said curtly. For how long? I shrugged. Does it matter? Her lips parted, but whatever she was about to say died on her tongue. I didn't wait for her to try again. I stepped outside, slamming the door behind me. The cool evening air hit me like a slap. I didn't have a destination in mind, but my car seemed to know where to go. 15 minutes later, I found myself parked outside a familiar bar. The same bar where this whole mess had started. Inside, the dim lighting and low hum of conversation felt like a reprieve. I slid into a booth in the corner and ordered a whiskey. Neat. As the first sip burned its way down, I pulled out my phone. My inbox was flooded with messages from the dinner guests. Some were apologetic, others awkwardly supportive. One even tried to make a joke about spicing up dinner parties. I deleted them all without replying. But then I saw a message from the private investigator. P.I. Got something interesting today. Call me when you're free. My pulse quickened. I stepped outside and dialed his number, pacing under the faint glow of the streetlights. You're not going to like this, he said after answering. I haven't liked anything for a while, I replied. What did you find? There was a pause, and I could almost hear him bracing himself. Mark isn't the only one. The words hung in the air, heavy and crushing. What the hell does that mean? I asked, my voice low and tight. After Mark bolted from your dinner party, he met up with someone. A woman. They were arguing. Seemed like she was upset about him being seen with Jenna. I followed them, did some digging. Turns out, Mark's been seeing multiple women, and Jenna's one of them. But she's not the first. My grip on the phone tightened. Are you saying she knew about this? Hard to say, he admitted. But it doesn't look like Mark was exactly keeping his options hidden. Your wife either didn't notice, or didn't care. A bitter laugh escaped me. Of course. Why wouldn't she pick a serial cheater to cheat with? Perfect. Look, man, the PI said, his tone sympathetic. You've got more than enough to move forward. Divorce court would eat this up if that's the route you're considering. I ended the call without replying, my head spinning. It wasn't just betrayal, it was humiliation, layers upon layers of it. Jenna hadn't just cheated on me. She'd thrown herself into a tangled mess with a man who didn't even value her enough to be discreet. I sat in the car for what felt like hours, staring at the steering wheel. My anger had crystallized into something colder, something more calculating. When I finally returned home, Jenna was sitting on the couch, her arms wrapped around her knees like a child in trouble. She looked up as I entered, her eyes rimmed with red. Jake, she started, her voice barely above a whisper. I know about the others, I said bluntly, cutting her off. Her face went pale. What are you talking about? Mark's other women, I said, stepping closer. Did you know? Or were you just that naive? Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. I didn't. Don't, I snapped. Just don't. I don't want your excuses or your lies. I want the truth, Jenna. Did you know? Tears spilled down her cheeks, but I didn't feel the usual pang of guilt. No, she said, her voice cracking. I didn't know. I thought he cared about me. A bitter laugh escaped me. Cared about you? He couldn't even keep his story straight. You were just another notch on his belt, Jenna. Congratulations. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. For the first time, I felt the faintest hint of pity. But it wasn't enough to change anything. I'm done, I said, my voice calm but firm. We're done. You've made your choices, and now I'm making mine. Her head snapped up, panic flashing across her face. Jake, please. No, I said, cutting her off. This is over. You broke us, Jenna. And now you get to live with that. I turned and walked upstairs, her sobs echoing faintly behind me. The papers sat on the dining table the next morning, stark against the dark wood. Jenna didn't notice them at first. She stumbled into the kitchen, her face pale and drawn, and reached for the coffee pot like she was running on autopilot. I stayed silent, watching from the corner of the room, my arms crossed. It wasn't until she turned and saw me that her gaze shifted to the papers. Her hand froze mid-air, the coffee pot wobbling precariously. What's this? She asked, her voice hoarse. Divorce papers, I said evenly. Her eyes widened, darting between me and the documents. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious, I replied, stepping closer. I told you last night, this is over. There's nothing left to fix. Tears welled in her eyes, but I wasn't moved. Not this time. She reached for the papers, her hands trembling as she flipped through them. Jake, you don't have to do this. We can go to counseling. We can fix this. Fix what? I shot back, my voice rising. The lies? The cheating? The complete lack of respect for our marriage? Tell me, Jenna, what exactly is there to fix? Her tears spilled over, but her expression hardened. You're just running away, she snapped. You can't handle the fact that maybe, just maybe, you played a part in this. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. Oh, don't worry, Jenna. I've been over this 100 times in my head. Maybe I wasn't perfect, but I didn't lie to you. I didn't sneak around behind your back. You don't get to blame me for your choices. She slammed the coffee pot onto the counter, her face flushed with anger. So that's it? You're throwing everything away? Our life together? 6 years of marriage. You already threw it away, I said coldly. I'm just cleaning up the mess. Her face crumpled, and she sank into a chair, clutching her head in her hands. For a moment, the room was filled with nothing but the sound of her shaky breaths. Jake, she whispered, her voice breaking. I love you. I know I messed up, but I love you. Doesn't that count for something? I leaned against the counter, studying her. This was the moment I had been dreading, the part where I had to face the ghost of the woman I once loved and decide if there was anything left worth saving. But there wasn't. Love doesn't look like this, I said softly. Love isn't lying. It isn't betrayal. Whatever this is, Jenna, it's not love. She looked up at me, her eyes hollow. So, that's it? You're walking away. I'm walking towards something better, I replied. Something honest. You should try it sometime. I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. Where are you going? She called after me, desperation creeping into her voice. To my lawyer, I said without turning around. We're done, Jenna. Sign the papers. As the door clicked shut behind me, I felt the first breath of relief I'd had in months. The next few days passed in a blur of legal consultations and logistical planning. My lawyer, Angela, was a no-nonsense professional who had seen it all. She walked me through the process of filing for divorce, her tone calm but firm, reminding me to stay focused on the end goal, freedom. It's going to get messy, she warned, sliding a stack of documents across the table. People like Jenna don't give up control easily. Be prepared for her to push back, emotionally and legally. She wasn't wrong. By the time I got home that evening, Jenna had already started to fight. She'd packed up her things, half-heartedly at best, leaving the house in a state of chaotic disarray. Clothes spilled out of open suitcases, and random piles of belongings dotted the living room like landmines. I'm staying at my sister's for now, she said when I walked in, her tone clipped. But don't think for a second that this is over. I dropped my keys onto the counter and met her glare with a calm I didn't entirely feel. It is over, Jenna. You just haven't accepted it yet. She scoffed, crossing her arms. You're making the biggest mistake of your life, Jake. You're throwing away a marriage, a home. For what? To be alone. To be free of you, I shot back. To rebuild my life without wondering every day if the person I'm with is lying to my face. Her nostrils flared, and for a moment, I thought she might lunge at me. Instead, she laughed. A bitter, humorless sound. You're so full of yourself, acting like you're the victim here, like you didn't have a hand in all of this falling apart. I wasn't the one sneaking around, I said sharply. I wasn't the one brushing my lips against someone else's neck under the faint bar light. Her face blanched, and for a moment, the mask of anger slipped. There it was, guilt. I stepped closer, my voice low and steady. You think I didn't see? That I didn't know? Jenna, I gave you every chance to come clean, every chance to fix this. And what did you do? You doubled down, lied to my face. And now you want to act like this is my fault. She stared at me, her chest rising and falling with shaky breaths. I never meant for it to get this far, she said finally, her voice cracking. I made a mistake, Jake. A stupid, awful mistake. But it doesn't have to end like this. It already ended, I said. The moment you decided someone else was worth more than us, it ended. Now all we're doing is closing the book. She wiped at her eyes angrily, as though furious at herself for crying. You're going to regret this, she said through clenched teeth. You're going to wake up one day and realize you threw away the best thing that ever happened to you. I laughed, shaking my head. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, Jenna. But the person you are now, she's not even close. With that, I turned and walked to the bedroom, leaving her to stew in her own bitterness. I heard the door slam minutes later, the sound echoing through the empty house. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to peace. The day Jenna officially moved out, the house felt eerily quiet. There was no shouting, no tears, no dramatic goodbye. Just the sound of her dragging suitcases down the stairs and the faint click of the front door as it closed behind her. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the space where she'd left a chipped mug behind on the counter. It felt strange, like the final piece of her presence lingered in that tiny object. Without thinking, I grabbed the mug, opened the trash can, and dropped it in. That was the last trace of her in my life. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, paperwork, and cautious steps forward. Jenna's initial resistance to signing the divorce papers melted into resignation. Whether it was guilt, shame, or simply exhaustion, I didn't know, and I didn't care to ask. She signed the documents without further theatrics, leaving Angela pleasantly surprised. You got lucky, Angela said during our final meeting. Most cases like this drag out for months. I think she realized she couldn't win. I nodded, not bothering to correct her. This wasn't about winning. It was about reclaiming my life. The final blow came when the divorce was finalized. I received the official notice on a Tuesday afternoon, a crisp white envelope with the court seal stamped on the front. As I opened it, a strange mix of emotions washed over me. Relief, sadness, and something I hadn't felt in a long time, hope. That night, I sat on the back porch with a beer in hand, staring up at the stars. The silence of the empty house no longer felt oppressive. Instead, it felt like possibility. A blank slate. My phone buzzed beside me, and I glanced down to see a message from one of the dinner party guests, a mutual friend. Hey Jake, just wanted to say I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself. If you ever need to talk or grab a drink, let me know. I smiled faintly, typing out a quick reply. Thanks. I appreciate it. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of connection. Not just to others, but to myself. The person I'd been before all of this. The person I was determined to find again. The lessons from the past few months had been brutal but necessary. I learned that trust isn't just a word. It's the foundation of everything. Without it, even the strongest love will crumble. I also learned that walking away isn't weakness. It's strength. It's choosing yourself when someone else refuses to. And Jenna? I didn't hate her, not anymore. Hate takes energy, and I wasn't wasting mine on her. She'd made her choices, and now she'd live with them. As I sat there, the stars twinkling above me, I realized this wasn't just the end of a chapter. It was the start of a new one. One I'd write on my own terms, free of lies, free of betrayal. For the first time in a long time, I felt ready to turn the page.